there are moments in science when the universe stops being polite and starts to whisper something that makes everyone in the room lean in. Most discoveries arrive that way, not with fanfare, but with a subtle misfit in the data, a trace that shouldn't be there, a light that lingers in the wrong place, a timing offset small enough to be dismissed until you stack enough evidence, and the pattern refuses to be accidental. That is how this story began, not with an explosion, but with a humming in the instruments. It began quietly, with an object cataloged as 3I/Atlas. At first glance, 3I/Atlas looked like one of the many interstellar visitors we've learned to recognize. A fast-moving point of light on a survey, an object on a hyperbolic trajectory that would pass through and be gone. We have seen visitors before, ʻOumuamua in 2017, Borisov in 2019, each odd in its own way. But as data accumulated, it became clear this was not merely another passing rock or ice ball. It was larger, faster, and behaved in ways that resisted any neat classification. When the James Webb Space Telescope, humanity's most sensitive eye in the infrared, aimed at it, what it recorded did more than perplex scientists. It changed the conversation about what could enter our solar system. Size matters. Early estimates put 3I/Atlas's diameter between 6 and 9 miles. To visualize that, an object the size of a small city moving across interplanetary space. That scale alone raises questions about structural integrity and origin. How does something that large stay intact while plunging across cosmic distances? How does it survive the tidal stresses near stars and planetary encounters? Natural objects that size, traveling at extreme speeds, tend to fragment. Yet 3I/Atlas remained coherent, whole, unshaken. Speed complicates the mystery. Observers clocked its velocity at more than 130,000 miles per hour, fast enough to circle the Earth several times in a minute. That velocity is not simply high. Its behavior through gravitational fields betrayed intelligence or engineering. Instead of being scattered or significantly perturbed by massive bodies, the object used planetary gravity, like someone using stepping stones across a stream. Its path was hyperbolic, a one-way pass through our system. But the detailed choreography was anything but random. It skimmed near Mars, then negotiated an arc that brought it into observational ranges for Earth, while often hiding critical approaches in the solar glare. After Earth, it threaded past Venus, and then moved toward Jupiter. For planetary encounters, aligned in a way that maximized observational opportunities while minimizing direct interference. Simulations run by astronomers put the odds of a natural object following such a statistically precise sequence at vanishingly low levels, a fraction of a percent. That is not coincidence. That reads like planning. It wasn't just the trajectory. Webb's infrared imagery revealed a trailing glow, but not the diffuse, chaotic plume we associate with cometary outgassing. This was concentrated, directional, and consistent. Spectrographic analysis of the trail showed thermal emission signatures that behaved like sustained exhaust. The pulses were regular, a rhythm that had engineers and astrophysicists leaning over spectrograms late into the night. Internal analysis noted cyclic energy bursts approximately every 19 seconds. Each pulse correlated with minute course adjustments. Those bursts left measurable changes in the object's velocity and vector. That is not a passive phenomenon. That is control. Then there were the materials. Embedded within thermal analyses were traces of highly conductive elements and engineered electromagnetic profiles inconsistent with natural mineralogy. Superconductive-like signatures, materials that in the context of terrestrial science are manufactured, refined, and used for highly specific technological purposes. These materials, the analysis suggested, were not random inclusions, but part of a design system. That combination, controlled thrust, engineered materials, and precise trajectory planning, led many at JPL, ESA, and other observatories to a single chilling conclusion. This is not a comet. This is a vehicle. If you accept that conclusion even for a second, the implications cascade. A vehicle capable of maintaining integrity at that scale, applying directed thrust in deep space, and appearing to exploit relativistic and gravitational mechanics with intentionality, suggests technological capabilities orders of magnitude beyond our own. Propulsion simulations from an array of models, ion drives, nuclear pulses, matter-antimatter constructs, failed to reproduce the observed motion. The only theoretical framework that produced anything resembling the measured behavior was one that manipulates space itself. Vacuum field manipulation, or methods that alter local spacetime gradients to create directional motion without classical reaction mass. In lay terms, not pushing against propellant, but changing the geometry of space behind the object so it falls forward. It's kind of post-Newtonian travel, a technology more at home in speculative physics papers than in present-day engineering labs. If that is indeed what is being used, then the creators of this object are not merely advanced, they may be millennia ahead. The pulses added another layer of mystery. Once cryptographers and signal analysts applied pattern recognition to the exhaust pulses, they discovered structure. These were not uniform, identical pulses. They featured modulations in timing and amplitude that mapped onto prime number sequences, geometric harmonics, and ratios seen in universal constants and biological patterns. Running the pulse data through AI engines designed to decode fast radio bursts produced a startling result. The exhaust appears to be carrying an embedded signal, data encoded in the rhythm of motion and energy. Crucially, the directionality of that signal was not earthbound. Instead, it pointed into deep space, toward a relatively empty region with no obvious stellar markers. Some scientists suggested the pulses might be status logs directed homeward. Others proposed something bolder. They're a beacon, a key, or activation code intended to trigger something at another location. That idea, that the pulses were intended to speak to something else, gained traction when unrelated anomalies on Earth synchronized with the object's activity. Geomagnetic monitors around the world, sensors that normally flicker only during solar storms or seismic disturbances, reported coordinated ultra-low frequency pulses coinciding with the exhaust emissions. Islands of the globe that are oceans apart recorded matched signatures. Marine migration routes shifted in unexpected ways. Birds altered long-established flyways. Whales deviated from recorded paths. And GPS anomalies occurred in localized swaths. Satellites in low orbit picked up faint electromagnetic echoes that looked as if something below the ionosphere was reflecting signals upward rather than the other way around. The pattern was too precise to be random. Researchers hypothesized the exhausted coded energy was coupling with Earth's electromagnetic environment, reactivating dormant resonances or memories embedded in geological or possibly engineered substrates. What those coupled systems could be: geological oddities, ancient artifacts, or synthetic arrays buried in deep time, remain speculative and for many uncomfortable. This is the point where astrophysics touches anthropology, and ancient history theories begin to bleed into cutting-edge signal processing. If a signal can resonate with Earth in a way that births synchronized effects across species and instruments, then whatever is being triggered is not merely physical. It may be systemic. Then, at the moment when the conversation was spiraling into the realm of plausible nightmare scenarios, the propulsion stopped. Webb's follow-up scans showed the glow extinguished, no rhythmic exhaust, no thermal pulses. For observers who hoped the object had simply run out of fuel or malfunctioned, the silence was a relief. For others, the silence was worse. The object slowed its active emissions, but did not deviate from its projected path. Its momentum increased, rather than decreasing, and it maintained structural integrity in a way no natural object would. If the exhaust had been a broadcast, perhaps it had finished its transmission. If it had been an activation signal, perhaps it had completed its handshake. And then, almost immediately after that cessation, Voyager probes positioned far beyond the planets registered a near-simultaneous low-band electromagnetic anomaly. Both probes picked up coordinated blips at the same moment the exhaust terminated. Those instruments, relics of a more human era of exploration, had somehow recorded a signature that aligned with the pause. This synchronous timing, exhaust pulsing and then cutting off, combined with deep space probes recording a faint activation elsewhere, introduced a new and terrifying possibility. This object had been a key, and by pulsing it had unlocked something beyond simple observation. Consider ʻOumuamua again. That interstellar visitor was fast, small, and silent, an object that came, skimmed the system, and left with almost no detectable thermal or emission signatures. But ʻOumuamua did leave behind a brief electromagnetic trace, an ephemeral echo in the data we captured at the time. Alone, it was puzzling. Together with the new evidence from 3I/Atlas, it began to look like two-stage behavior. ʻOumuamua as the lock, an inert artifact embedding instructions or resonances. 3I/Atlas as the key, the activator that runs the sequence centuries or millennia later. Some in scientific circles have labeled this the lock and key hypothesis. Early remote deployments scattered dormant structures designed to remain inert until a later trigger activates them. It's an idea that feels ripped from science fiction until you overlay the datasets, and the fit is too tight to ignore. If an activation occurred, where would the target be? Some of the most unsettling findings pointed closer to home than anyone wanted. A private satellite array detected a non-radio burst of energy directed toward a precise lunar location, a mascon, a concentration of mass beneath the surface long associated with unexplained anomalies. Seismometers left by past missions, mostly dormant, briefly registered vibrations synchronized with the exhaust pulses. The lunar coordinates corresponded to an old crater whose geology had always prompted questions, a spot often dismissed as an oddity of impact history. The new thermal spike at that mascon, followed by microseismic activity and the matching 11-second rhythmic pattern previously observed in the object's emissions, suggested the moon may itself have been a node in a solar system scale network. If something buried beneath the lunar crust is responsive to the same frequency pattern present in the object's exhaust, then 3I/Atlas was not simply passing by. It was communicating with a local installation. All of this, directional exhaust, encoded pulses, material science anomalies, synchronized terrestrial and lunar echoes, points to a capability that is more than reconnaissance. It suggests interaction, activation, and coordination. The science community has always imagined first contact as a clear, intentional message. Mathematics, prime numbers, simple pictograms broadcast across radio waves. But what if first contact doesn't announce itself? What if it arrives as geometry and rhythm, as a maneuver and a pulse, as a sequence that quietly triggers dormant constructs long hidden within a system? That's a shift in paradigm that moves us from thinking about messages to thinking about protocols. Protocols are not designed to be polite. They are instructions that can reconfigure systems. There is another strand to this tale that concerns time and gravity. Webb observed subtle but reproducible distortions in light passing near 3I/Atlas. Background stars appeared to shift by microseconds in photon arrival time, an effect inconsistent with the object's apparent mass. It looked as if space-time itself was being locally perturbed, a gravitational lens without enough mass to explain the lensing. Those distortions were dynamic. The lensing shifted and warped in response to external signals and broadcasts. In one analysis, photon arrival times altered when Earth transmitted directed signals toward the object. That responsiveness suggested the local structure of spacetime around the object was not passive. The data resembled models that include compact spacetime engineering, wormhole-like effects, controlled metric manipulation, or mobile singularities, phenomena currently theoretical and deeply exotic. If 3I/Atlas manipulates spacetime, it may not be a vessel at all in the sense we conventionally understand. It could be an apparatus designed to open or maintain a spatial gateway, a mobile manipulation of geometry that creates a passage rather than a hull. The phrase mobile singularity has been floated in private as a placeholder, something that warps space to create transient pathways. If that analogy holds, then the worry is not the object itself, but what sits on the other side of such a gateway. Gates are rarely installed for trivial reasons. They exist to create access. If someone else had placed the key, who or what would come through once the lock has turned? Adding a biological dimension to the threat, Advanced spectroscopic analysis of the object's low-level emissions, done with AI patterning and overlaid against molecular folding models, revealed recursive molecular patterns that resembled organized carbon lattices and base pair-like structures. The emission layers hinted at encoded biochemical signatures, geometry, and folding sequences that are far too ordered to be random. In other words, the glow itself looked like a molecular message, code shaped like life. This raises the possibility, no longer purely speculative in some labs, that the object could be carrying pre-assembled biological scaffolds, information-rich molecular templates intended to seed environments. Panspermia in a new guise, directed distribution of life's building blocks, packaged and refined for delivery. If that's true, the object might be less of a probe and more of a seed, a conveyance designed for transformation rather than observation. That raises ethical and existential questions. Is seeding another world a benign act of propagation, a gesture of cosmic gardening? Or is it an invasive, irreversible process that preempts the natural evolutionary arc of a biosphere? For an object to carry the means to alter a planetary environment, synthetically or biologically, without consent is to act as an agent of change on scales humanity has barely begun to imagine. The idea that our planet might be a target, a garden selected long ago, is not comforting. The confluence of all these findings, trajectory optimization, intelligent propulsion signatures, encoded exhaust, synchronized global anomalies, lunar node activation, space-time manipulation, and biomolecular emissions, forces a recalibration of how we define contact. It's no longer about hearing a hello. It's about recognizing when an external system begins to operate inside our own. And we may already be inside that operation. If nodes around our solar system can be triggered, if buried technology can be woken by a passing object, then what looked like an extraordinary happenstance could instead be the execution of a long-simmering plan. Science agencies reacted as best they could, internal memos, restricted briefings, and cross-agency task forces. Most public statements were cautious, citing ongoing analysis and the need for more data. Yet behind closed doors, simulations ran that considered worst-case and best-case scenarios. Some teams argued for aggressive observation and experimental broadcasting back to the object to see how it responds. Others cautioned that broadcasting blind could be dangerous if the object's local space-time field is reactive or if the object's function includes detection-response contingencies. Political and military entities, understandably, were attentive. The lines between scientific curiosity and national security blurred. When a phenomenon has the potential to alter planetary scale systems, it ceases to be a problem for researchers alone. Amid the data and the classified chatter, there remains something haunting about the object's silence. It emits no directed message to us. There is no recorded transmission addressed to human receivers, no overt attempt to communicate in our languages or mathematical constructs aimed specifically at Earth. It moves like a ghost in the night, visible only because our instruments are now sensitive enough to notice. That silence could be deliberate. Maybe the architects never intended us to be the audience. Or perhaps this is just the protocol designers were willing to follow in systems where the primary node is not a biological civilization, but a network of dormant constructs waiting to be woken. We are left with a suite of possibilities, none simple and none reassuringly neat. 1. 3I/Atlas is an exploratory probe sent by an extraterrestrial intelligence that surveilled our system, learned enough to send a follow-up, and then tripped a protocol designed to interact with built-in infrastructure in our neighborhood. 2. It is a delivery system, a seed or terraforming payload, aimed at altering environments, possibly as a way to extend life or colonize. 3. It is a component of an interstellar maintenance network, activating nodes to perform functions we do not yet understand, perhaps millennia long in design. For the more alarming scenario, it is an instrument designed to probe and, if necessary, neutralize threats, in which case triggering dormant systems may be defensive rather than offensive from its creator's perspective. Each scenario carries consequences for how humanity should respond. Do we attempt to communicate back by replicating the pulse sequences? Do we try to jam or disrupt the activation frequency? Do we send missions to the lunar mascon to investigate a risky, technologically demanding endeavor with geopolitical ramifications? Or do we aim to be patient observers, recording, learning, and preparing contingencies? The answer is not simply scientific. It is strategic, philosophical, and moral. What's clear is that the universe is no longer an abstract backdrop. It is a place where the traces of other agents, machines, and histories might be waiting, and where our actions, deliberate or accidental, can have outsized effects. We stepped into a new chapter, one in which detection is not the same as control, and where the first sign of extraterrestrial presence might not be a friendly beacon, but a pulse, a trajectory, a set of consequences unfolding across star and stone. At the heart of this narrative is a simple fact. 3I/Atlas changed the questions we ask. Before, we imagined contact as an exchange, message sent, message received. Now we must also ask, who designed the infrastructure that spans a system? Who established the nudges that react to particular frequencies? What long-lived plans might be set in motion across millennia, scheduled to run when the right key arrives? And what does it mean for a civilization to have the patience and foresight to implant such protocols across a solar system? For the public, the events around this object are a study in cognitive dissonance. On the one hand, humanity has longed for contact for decades. On the other hand, direct evidence of purposeful, advanced engineering in deep space challenges our sense of control and safety. There is wonder, certainly, but also an instinctive dread. We evolved to be wary of unknown agents with capabilities beyond our own. That instinct is adaptive. It keeps us cautious and alive. So where do we go from here? The immediate priorities are clear. Strengthen observation networks, coordinate international scientific and policy responses, and maintain transparency, where possible to avoid panic and misinformation. We need global platforms for monitoring and interpreting the system-wide signals and open channels for sharing data. We also need ethical frameworks for deciding whether to intervene or to observe. The potential for irreversible change, whether biological, technological, or geopolitical, means decisions must be made with humility and broad consultation. But beyond policy, there is also a human story. This is a test of how a species that has just begun to look outward manages the consequences of what it finds. Will curiosity override caution? Will fear curtail scientific inquiry? Can we craft a collective response that reflects the best of human capacity, cooperation, patience, and moral consideration, rather than the worst? As of now, 3I/Atlas continues on its path. Its exact next moves a subject of feverish study. Its brief active phase, its encoded pulses, the lunar activations, the terrestrial resonances, and the Voyager's echoes all form a mosaic that refuses a tidy explanation. Whether it is a scout, a seed, an activator, or something else entirely, it forces us to confront the possibility that we are not only observers in the cosmos, but participants in processes initiated long before our species existed. We live in the shadow of that realization now. The silence that follows the pulses is not empty. It is charged with possibility. It asks us, in effect, what we will do with the information we have, how we will prepare, and whether we can move beyond fear to an informed, cooperative response. The universe has nudged, triggered, and perhaps tested a system that includes us. Our reply, whatever shape it takes, will be written in policy decisions, scientific papers, and perhaps in the next wave of instruments we send to the moon, to Jupiter, or beyond. If you're watching this, you are part of that conversation. The evidence is complex, the interpretations contested, and the stakes, potentially, immense. Whether 3I/Atlas was meant to explore, to warn, to seed, or to wake something else, the event marks a shift. Space is no longer simply a place to observe. It's a domain where ancient protocols may still run, and where our actions can trigger consequences we can barely imagine. So ask yourself, did 3I/Atlas arrive to gather data on us, to alter our environment, or to activate something older and deeper within our system? Or was it all a cosmic accident, An engineered coincidence whose timing and effects simply lined up with human curiosity at the worst possible moment? We may not have definitive answers yet, but we have a path forward. Observe rigorously, coordinate widely, and proceed with humility. If you want to follow the developments, the science, the data releases, and the international responses, stay engaged and keep asking questions. The universe is talking to us in pulses, heat signatures, and orbital harmonies. Whether it is a message or a mechanism, we need to listen closely, think fast, and act wisely. The silence between the stars may be getting louder, and whatever replies, next will hear and be heard.